A hole opened in the sky. First the Ruby Storm, and now this. What was that noise? I can't even describe what I'm seeing. It's the Eldrazi coming through the breach. We're all doomed. I mean, you're all doomed. I'm getting to a shelter. All right, I'm safe in the shelter. This is where we took refuge from the Ruby Storm, so hopefully it's safe. So let's talk about Eldrazi through the breach. The primary goal of the deck is to survive until you can cast through the breach, to cheat Ulamog the Defiler or Emrakul the Aeon's Torrent on the battlefield, with the big Annihilator to just win, or to make your opponent sack so many permanents that there's no world that they could ever win. Everything else in the deck is put in there to either set up that combo or to survive. So let's talk about those cards. Let's start with the lands. First off, most of our lands need to produce colorless, specifically waste mana. Waste mana is mana not of any of the 5 colors of Magic, which is different than generic mana. I'll probably make a video about that in the future. There are cards in our deck that literally require that colorless mana. But besides that, we're also a red-green deck. So effectively, we're a 3-color deck. Waste, red, and green. So we're playing some lands that come in untapped that produce all 3 of those versions of the mana, meaning Grove of the Burn Willows and Carplusion Forest. They're kind of opposites of each other. Grove of the Burn Willows can tap for a waste at any point, or can tap for a red or green to give your opponent a life. We don't really care about giving our opponents life, because when the Eldrazi win, they win by miles. 1 life here or there is not a big deal. Then Carplusion Forest makes you lose a life, which is probably the worst land in our deck, but effectively having a come in untapped tri-land is totally worth it. We're playing a Gemstone Cavern so that when we're on the draw, we can effectively cheat that land onto the battlefield, because we only really need a few cards to win, and getting to that point as fast as possible is important. Eldrazi Temple is amazing in this deck, allowing it to tap for 2 waste mana for any Eldrazi spell. So that's all of the creatures in our deck, plus Kozilek's Command, and all his dust, and all of that stuff. In Magic, we call this like an Ancient Tomb effect, right? We also have another Ancient Tomb effect in our deck in Ugin's Labyrinth, where when we play it, we can exile a colorless spell from our hand that costs 7 or more, which is quite a few cards in our deck. And if we do that, then it taps for 2 colorless, not just for Eldrazi, but for everything. In addition to that, we have 2 Besejus, which are green mana, but also is like main deck, artifact, and enchantment hate, and some basics in 2 forests, a mountain, and 1 waste, for something to fetch for Ghost Quarter effects or Field of Ruin effects or things like that. Now let's talk about the actual meat of the deck. Let's start with the combo. Through the Breach is a 5 mana instant, where you put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, it gains haste, and then you sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. And so like I said before, the goal of the deck is to cast this card with an Emrakul or an Ulamog in our hand. So let's talk about those cards. When you cast Ulamog, your opponent exiles the top half of their library rounded up. This does happen in those long-term games, but remember, when we cast Through the Breach, we're not casting Ulamog. It has Ward, sacrifice 2 permanents. Ward means when you target it, that thing that you're targeting with gets countered unless you do the thing. In this case, sacrifice 2 permanents. So it's a little hard to kill. And when it enters the battlefield, it gets +1/+1 counters equal to the greatest mana value among cards in exile. And we put a lot of cards in exile, like with Ugin's Labyrinth and Thought-Knot Seer and things like that anyway, so it normally enters with +1/+1 counters. And it has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it, meaning when it attacks, your opponent sacrifices a number of permanents equal to its Annihilator, which again, in this case, is the number of +1/+1 counters. So that's our first payoff. Our second payoff is Emrakul the Aeon's Torrent, which is a classic payoff in decks like this. Emrakul the Aeon's Torrent can't be countered, which again doesn't really matter when we're casting Through the Breach, because we're not casting Emrakul. And when you cast a spell, take an extra turn after this one. This will come up once in a great while, but generally we don't care about this. Has flying, protection from spells that are 1 or more colors, and Annihilator 6. So it's hard to block, hard to kill, and your opponent sacrifices 6 permanents whenever it attacks. And when it's put into the graveyard from anywhere, you shuffle your graveyard into your library. So actually it's just like weird main deck hate against like mill strategies and things like that. Oh, and it's a 15/15. So when you attack with Emrakul, most of the time you're just winning. That is what we're trying to do with this Eldrazi deck, and what it sounds like they're doing up there. So how do we set that up? First off, let's kind of go off of our lands and talk about a little bit of mana ramp. We have Talisman of Impulse, which is a 2 mana artifact that taps for either a colorless mana, or you can pay 1 life and it taps for a red or a green. This is mana acceleration, a little bit mana fixing. A really, really good start is like Ugin's Labyrinth, exile something from our hand, play Talisman of Impulse, cast Ancient Stirrings or something. It's a very, very, very good start, and just allows us to both fix our colors and to be able to get mana as fast as possible so that we can execute the combo. Ways that we can sort of set up this combo though is Ancient Stirrings. Ancient Stirrings is a 1 green mana sorcery where we look at the top 5 cards of our deck, put a colorless card into our hand, and the rest in the bottom of our library. The beautiful part about this is, remember, lands are colorless, so really the only thing in our deck that it doesn't hit are other Ancient Stirrings and Through the Breach itself. Everything else we can grab with Ancient Stirrings, which makes it an incredible card when we're searching for really specific cards, which we kind of have to in a deck like this. Another card that sort of fills the same purpose is Devourer of Destiny. If we start the game with it in our opening hand, we can reveal it, and at the beginning of our first upkeep, we look at the top 4 cards of our deck, put 1 back on top, and exile the rest. What's cool is those exiles fuel Ulamog, but also we kind of get to shape our first turn and really like select what cards we want. Not as good as Ancient Stirrings, but it's free. Plus, Devourer of Destiny itself is a 7 mana 6/6, so it can be put underneath Ugin's Labyrinth. And when you cast it, you get to exile a permanent that's 1 or more colors, so it's kind of unconditional removal. One of those middle of the ground payoffs. So I'm sure you're asking, how do we live until this happens? Because this all seems sort of like a fantasy. First off is Thought-Knot Seer. Thought-Knot Seer is a 4 mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, you look at your opponent's hand and exile a non-land card out of it, which again, fuels Ulamog. And then you have a 4/4. However, when it leaves the battlefield, your opponent draws a card, which I don't think you really care about. So it's really good against combo decks or good against cards that are specifically good against you, things like counter spells and stuff like that. We're also playing for the One Ring. The One Ring is a legendary artifact that if you tap it, you put a bird encounter on the One Ring and then draw cards equal to the number of bird encounters that are on the One Ring. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose life equal to the number of bird encounters on the One Ring. So it really ramps up with the amount of cards that you draw. But also if you cast it and it enters the battlefield from your hand, you gain protection until your next turn. So it can kind of give you 1 extra turn against a lot of decks. Plus as indestructible, because why not? We're also playing 2 Allah's Dust, which is a 7 mana all permanents that are 1 or more colors, so it wipes our opponent's board, but not our board. And also see that it's an Eldrazi card, so Eldrazi Temple adds 2 mana, not just 1 for Allah's Dust. I think I should move. I think that the ceiling's gonna come down right here. Let's move. Hey look, I found a drum set in the shelter. I play guitar, I don't play drums. So let's talk about some combos and synergies that these Eldrazi have. First off, there's a really cool play pattern where you can exile something absolutely massive, like an Embercool onto Ugin's Labyrinth, right before you cheat Ulamog onto the battlefield, so that it gets 15 +1/+1 counters, and it has Annihilator 15. So just remember, you can kind of select what's exiled. You don't just have to like leave it up to chance or whatever. Also, if you have Devourer of Destiny in your opening hand, you have quite a bit of flexibility on what you can keep, and you can be a little bit more liberal with it. Remember, Eldrazi Temple taps for 2 mana, not only for all of our Eldrazi creatures, but also for Eldrazi spells like Allah's Dust and Kozilek's Command. If you're playing against counterspell decks or decks that you think might answer your creatures, and if you have 2 Through the Breach in your hand, you can stress your opponent's mana by casting Through the Breach on your opponent's end step, because remember, it's an instant. And the way that it's worded is you don't sacrifice the creature until the next end step. So if you cast it on one end step, you don't sacrifice it until the next one. So you can cast Through the Breach on your opponent's end step, threaten that creature. If it resolves, you just untap and attack with it, not a big deal. If it doesn't, you stress their mana and make them have 2 pieces of interaction against you, because you can untap and cast another Through the Breach. This comes up quite a bit against these counterspell decks because these counterspell matches happen to go on like quite a while. And as with every The One Ring deck, remember that it's legendary. So once you get it up to 3 or 4 counters, tap it again to draw 4 or 5 even, then you can cast another one, legend rule out the one with a bunch of burden counters on it, and be able to totally restart, get protection for another turn, and not have to take a ton of damage at the beginning of your next upkeep. I think the Eldrazi heard my drumming. We should move to another shelter. There's a lot of stuff in this shelter, so I don't really want to stay long. But let's talk about some flex slots for this Eldrazi deck. In my deck, the 3rd and 4th Ulamog are kind of flex slots, and in the main deck, you can play Allah's Dust over 1 or 2 of those. But really, the rest of the main deck is totally figured out, and I wouldn't consider flex slots like at all. You kind of have to play the rest of the cards. However, the sideboard has a little bit more flexibility. My flex slots include the 3rd Trinisphere, the 3rd and 4th Chalice of the Void, and the 2nd Disruptor Flute. You can replace any of those cards for up to 3 the Stone Brain if you're worried about combo decks, and like 1 Gemstone Cavern. Speaking of the sideboard, let's talk about sideboarding. Man, I really wish someone would clean their shelter. It was me. So let's talk about sideboarding against the top 10 most popular decks in Modern. Right now, the most popular deck, according to MTG Goldfish, is Ruby Storm. If you're using my list, you're bringing in the 4 Chalice of Void and the 3 Trinisphere. You're gonna be taking out the 2 Allah's Dust, all of the One Rings because they can kill through the One Ring, and 1 Ulamog. Against Bant Nadu, you're going to be bringing in the 2 Dismember, the 2 Disruptor Flute, the 2 Null Elemental Blasts, and you're gonna be taking out 2 Allah's Dust because they don't have a lot of permanents that you can kill with Allah's Dust, and all for the One Ring because they can kill through the One Ring again. Against Jeskai Control, you're bringing in 2 Thief of Existence for the One Ring and taking out 2 Allah's Dust. Against Strawn, you're bringing in 2 Thief of Existence for the One Ring and many other permanents like Karn. You're also bringing in 2 Disruptor Flute. You're taking out the 2 Allah's Dust and 2 Ulamog the Defiler. Against Living End, we're bringing in all 4 Chalice of the Void, the 2 Disruptor Flute, and the 3 Trinisphere. We're going to be bringing out the 2 Allah's Dust, all 4 the One Ring, and 3 Ulamog the Defiler. Against Boros Energy, we're bringing in 2 Dismember and taking out 2 Ulamog the Defiler. Against Gruul Prowess, we're bringing in 2 Dismember, the 3 Trinisphere, and the 4 Chalice of the Void. We're bringing out all 4 Ulamog the Defiler, 1 Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, 1 Through the Breach, and 3 Talisman of Impulse, because it's really important all the cards on our deck actually do something. Against Rakdos Scam, we're bringing in 2 Dismember and bringing out 2 Ulamog the Defiler. Again, notice we're bringing out 2 Ulamog the Defiler a lot. That happens a lot with flex slots. Dismember kills their creatures, Ulamog's the flex slot. Move on. Especially in these combo decks that we don't want to disrupt what's going on too much. Again, besides against Gruul Prowess that we just like need to interact or we die. Against Amulet Titan, we're bringing in 2 Dismember for the Dryads and 2 Thief of Existence just in case we can snipe something like an Amulet. We're bringing out 2 Allah's Dust and 2 Ulamog the Defiler. And then finally, against Mono Black Necro, we are bringing in 2 Dismember and 2 Thief of Existence for being able to hit Necro Dominance or even the One Ring or things like that. And we're taking out 4 Ulamog the Defiler because they can answer it just too easily. All right, I'm going back to the chair. I don't care if that's Eldrazi out there. So as you can hear above me, Eldrazi Breach is extremely powerful if it's allowed to do its thing. The big hang up for it though is that some hands are just wildly slow and they can just get run over before those big Eldrazi payoffs finally show up. And sometimes the deck just does nothing when you don't hit your accelerator lands and you just sit there staring at the Thought-Knot Seer in your hand while you're getting killed. And you should definitely pick up this deck if you like doing powerful things, but don't mind decks that have a fail rate or losing to good aggro hands even when you have a good hand. And if you like this video and like videos like this, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I think I hit the mic, but thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Now, I just need to figure out how to get some energy down here. The lights are going out. Bye.